Hi, my name is Ambrose. Welcome to my channel. Today's lesson is part of my series entitled How to Score Study. I do these video essays for two reasons. One, to help students learn to score study, as I believe it is its own discipline and takes time to master. And two, to showcase a work which I find beautiful or inspiring. When one score studies, what does one look for? Orchestration, melody, harmonic analysis, form. This lesson will hopefully help to answer some of those questions. In today's lesson, we will be showcasing Claudio Monteverdi's madrigal, Sfogava con la stelle. This is a beautiful piece which is perfectly idiomatic of the time period in which it was written, 1603. This lesson will be in three parts. 1. Score study basics. 2. A brief history of Monteverdi. And 3. An analysis of Sfogava con la stelle. Section 1. Score study basics. First, I'm going to show you how I organize and prep for an in-depth study of a given score. Essentially, I use 3 steps. They are as follows. 1. Gather materials. This includes score, text, any needed translations, and pencils and colored pencils. 2. Do a harmonic analysis of the piece to the best of your ability. I would approach this by listening to the piece once or twice, then spending a few days podcasting while I'm analyzing and marking up the score, i.e. writing in harmonic analysis using Roman numerals, which you can see here. You may have to sit at the piano for some of this work. 3. Listen to the piece again and make note of anything that excites the ear. Interesting orchestration, examples of text painting, an interesting modulation, things like that. A helpful note is to put in timestamps at page turns or section changes. Often in a 15-minute work, I would get lost and have to start the piece over to find my place. Section 2. Claudio Monteverdi and the Fourth Book of Madrigals. Claudio Monteverdi acted as a bridge between the High Renaissance and the early Baroque. Monteverdi was born in Cremona, Italy in 1567. He died in Venice in 1643. He would work for various courts and chapels across Italy throughout his life. His music would act as a transition from the primarily linear, modal part writing of the Renaissance to the vertically aligned harmony of the Baroque and ultimately the Classical period. Bear in mind the understanding and methodologies of tonal music theory had not yet been established. This would be an ongoing process. There were earlier music theorists, but a notable treatise on tonal harmony was written by the French composer Jean-Philippe Rameau in 1722. This is too broad a subject to tackle in this video, but just understand that Monteverdi was composing in a time when Western music was transitioning from this to this. Monteverdi was a notable composer for many reasons, not the least of which is that he wrote one of the very first operas, L'Orfeo, composed in 1607.
Acerba memoria e giusto
It is virtually the oldest opera still in the repertoire today. Monteverdi composed both religious and secular works. Monteverdi's secular book of madrigals, 9 in total, span almost his entire career, the first of which was published in 1587, the last published in 1612. We will be analyzing a work from the 4th book of madrigals, published in 1603. Book 4 is composed for 5 voices and represents a transitional point in Monteverdi's life and compositions. Monteverdi's madrigals are through-composed works primarily based on poems. Madrigals often focus on love, grief, and nature. Monteverdi sought to bring out the expressive nature of the text in his music, a break from tradition which placed higher emphasis on music, which resulted in a disconnect between the music and the text. Monteverdi more closely allied the two, which meant he used dissonances more freely if the text called for it. This resulted in his music being criticized as radical, as dissonances were very highly controlled during the Renaissance era. Section 3. Analysis Overview. In this section of the analysis, we will look at 3 main concepts before breaking down each phrase of the madrigal. 1. How the text relates to the music. 2. Harmonic analysis. And 3. Counterpoint. Let's start with a brief overview of each thing we will be watching for. 1. We will be watching for how the music relates to the text, generally speaking. More specifically, we will be watching for any text painting. A quick note, I do not speak Italian, so my pronunciation will be off and the exact placement of text may not line up accurately. With that being said, when it comes to score studying on your own, how do you tackle this if you do not speak the language? It helps to take it line by line and primarily work off the beginning of each line, not worrying about matching up each exact word. You can use reference clues to help with placement. For example, take the line, "of the idol whom I adore." Le idole is obviously idol, and ci adoro is obviously adore. Here's the text we'll be working with. In converse with the stars, a man sick with love gave vent to his pain beneath the night sky, and gazing at them said, "O lovely images of the idol whom I adore, just as you show her rare beauty to me when you shine like this, if you could only show her the ardent flame that burns me, then with your golden countenance you would make her compassionate just as you make me affectionate." Our text tells of a lovesick man under the night sky wishing for his love to reciprocate his affection. It is multi-dimensional, so it may modulate between major and minor, whereas if it was a song about grief, we may anticipate it being in a minor key. This translation was in the Dover edition of Madrigals Book 4 and 5. I like this translation better than others I found online, but you may check out a few different translations if needed. One of Monteverdi's goals was to make the vocal line resemble the sound of speech. So although there is some melisma, most syllables are tied to a single note. When there's more melisma, i.e. multiple notes on one syllable, it tends to be in spots with some emotional flourish, i.e. there needs to be some reason to use melisma. 2. What are we looking for harmonically speaking? This to me was a bit of a struggle to wrap my head around. The question to me is, if this music looks tonal and sounds tonal, in what sense were the rules of tonal harmony not yet established? I know in earlier Renaissance music, chords which aligned vertically were, in a sense, incidental or accidental, as they were thinking in terms of linear melody, more concerned with counterpoint, imitation, and control of dissonance. If anyone has any good resources on this topic, feel free to drop them in the comments. This piece is interesting because there is obviously some tonality in this music. There are clear 5-1 cadences, though they lack the 5-7-1 cadences, which become customary in the later Baroque. The music is not modal in nature, like music of the early Renaissance. One thing I noticed, which is different from music of the classical era, is that the music does not stay rooted in one key for more than a few measures. And I would not say that music, quote unquote, modulates. Rather, each phrase is tonicized. The music arrives in its own key after being marked by a strong cadence in the previous key. Here's a brief example. Measure 6 begins in D minor. 4 measures later, there is a 5-1 cadence with a 4-3 suspension, though this time the 1 is major, leaving us in D major. The new phrase begins in D major before rapidly shifting into a C major key area. After each cadence, the music does not typically modulate to the 5. Often it modulates up a second, third, or fourth. 3. Counterpoint. Counterpoint of this era still uses a large amount of imitation. Watch for imitation passed from voice to voice, like this, or imitation between groups of voices, like this. Listen for how Monteverdi changes the texture of the music by adding or subtracting voices, like this. Another common occurrence will be parallel thirds or sixths. Section 3b, Madrigal Analysis. Let's begin by listening to Sfogava con le stelle from Monteverdi's Fourth Book of Madrigals. The entire Fourth Book of Madrigals is written for 5 voices. We will use multiple recordings over the course of this video, all of which can be found on Spotify. The first recording we will use is by Le Nouveau Musique, led by Christian Kotzfeld. Listen for how Monteverdi portrays a lovesick man conversing with the stars.
Sfogava come stelle, un inferno d'amore, sotto notturno ciel, il suo dolore, e dice afflitto in La fareste col vostro sembiante pietosa.
Let's take it phrase by phrase and analyze our three aforementioned areas of interest: text, harmony, and counterpoint. This recording is by La Vexiana. In converse with the stars, a man sick with love gave vent to pain beneath the sky.
Sfogava con le stelle, quel ferro d'amore. Sotto notturno cielo, il suo
The piece begins in D minor, portraying a lovesick man. The first thing to notice is the first measure is notated as a whole note, so I'm not sure where the rhythm comes from. It must be in some other edition. The voices all sing in rhythmic unison for the majority of the first phrase. In phrase 2, gave vent to pain beneath the sky, there begins to be more rhythmic independence, particularly in the bass and the alto, which provides the 4/3 suspension. In measure 10, there is a 5/1 cadence with the 4/3 suspension, but we land on the parallel major, D major.
Sfogava con le stelle, quel ferro d'amore. Sotto notturno cielo, il
And gazing at them said, we begin the phrase in D major, though we quickly transition via a G chord to the key of C. This phrase is similar to the opening phrase and only lasts 4 measures. Oh, lovely images. As our subject begins to pour his heart out to the night sky, this is where we get our first flourish of melisma. The text becomes more expressive, thus the music becomes more open, florid, and expressive as well. We have our first dotted rhythm, also signifying something exciting is happening. The dotted rhythm is passed between the soprano, alto, and tenors, creating a woven texture of sound. This passage is in C major and ends with a 5/1 cadence with a 4/3 suspension in measure 20. Note we have seen 2 5/1 cadences, but no 5/7/1 cadences. O lovely images of the idol whom I adore. We begin this phrase in F major, an abrupt change of key that only lasts 3 measures before ending the phrase in D major. We see more imitation and parallel sixths between the alto and tenor 1. Just as you show her rare beauty to me. There is a nice rocking motion in the upper voices with an ascending line in the bass. The altos and bass take the hand off from the soprano and alto in imitation. There is also imitation in the tenor too, mirroring the bass from the previous 2 measures. We modulate to G minor with a 5/1 cadence in measure 30. When you shine like this. This phrase is a mirror of the last phrase, trading melodic material from the high voices down to the low voices in imitation. Monteverdi is just moving from minor 1 to 5, minor 1 to 5, tonicizing a key which he will abandon in just a few short measures. The phrase ends on A major before modulating up a third to F in the next phrase. If you could only show her the ardent flame that burns me. Here our subject again is making an impassioned plea, and again we have more melisma, showing the correspondence between florid music and the emotional content of the text. Soprano and alto lead the phrase with runs in parallel thirds, followed by stretto in tenor 1, an exact duplicate of the soprano, only an octave lower. When tenor 2 and bass receives the stretto, they are down a fourth, providing us with a 4-6-3-5-1 chord progression. Then with your golden countenance you would make. The new phrase is similar to our opening phrase, even the same key, D minor. The phrase acts as a reset. We end the phrase in G major. Not a lot of counterpoint. This is a reprieve from the florid melisma of the last phrase. Her compassionate just as you make me affectionate. Fairly straightforward passage. The main melodic idea is a quarter note descending by a leap to a half note. It happens 4 times in 4 measures. Again, the use of stretto, to imitate in close succession, creates a layered effect which allows the text of each voice to be heard clearly and distinctly. The text is repeated. Then, with your golden countenance, you would make her compassionate, just as you make me affectionate. These measures are some of the most beautiful, a simple 4-1-5 in F, but how it grows into the next measures is enrapturing. The same descending leap stretto is repeated, only this time there is an ascending line passed through the other voices, first in the soprano, then in fourths in the alto and tenor 1, then lastly in the bass after a 4-3 suspension, which lands in G minor in measure 62.
La fareste col vostrale sembiante pietosa,
Let's break down measure 64. A G minor chord, soprano moves from a D down to a G. She could have stayed on a D, but the descending leap adds interest and contrary motion to the tenor. The alto holds on to the A from the previous chord, creating a dissonance of a ninth, A against G, before leaping down a fifth to land on the fifth of the chord, D. Tenor 1 supplies the minor third of the chord, the B flat. Tenor 2 walks from an A up to a D. The passing tone of C creates an almost yearning tension. If they had just leapt from B flat to D, we would have lost the sense of motion and the dissonance. Meanwhile, the bass is holding onto the G for the duration of the measure. They are also finishing their line of text while the upper voices are restating their text. Measure 65 ends on a 5 of 5 chord with a 4-3 suspension. The last few measures continue to use the ascending line in stretto, while we make our way back to the original key area of D, first D minor, then ending on a D major chord. The last thing I want to draw your attention to is the overall structure of the piece. The piece is primarily through composed, though there are some similarities between measures 1 and measure 45. Going back to what I said about not staying in one key for very long, rather tonicizing a given chord, here is the overall tonicization of each phrase. D minor, D, C, F, D minor, G minor, D minor, F, D minor, G, F, G minor, D. Some of these tonicizations last only 3 measures or so. What conclusions can be drawn from this? I'm not sure, other than D minor is a prominent key throughout, a key often associated with melancholy or grief in the Baroque. We are going to listen to the piece one more time. This time I will play a different recording. This rendition is by Le Main Harmonique with Frédéric Bétus. This version has more ornamentation, trills, and turns, something which would have been common practice of the era.
Sfogava con le stelle un inferno d'amore sotto notturno cielo il suo dolore e dice a Cristo il nome La fareste col vostro olio sembiate pietosa, pietosa, sì, pietosa, sì. La fareste col vostro olio sembiante pietosa, sì, pietosa, sì. Che bene fata
The Monteverdi madrigals are truly some of my favorite works, each book more beautiful than the last. So I hope that was helpful and introduced you to some new music. Click like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.